I'm back. Bit of reconfiguration here. Everything's set up. Yeah, so today I'd like to try and actually get an instance of a lake with the new water tool working, and also have a river flowing down here with a waterfall, essentially replicating the Coldstream River and waterfall that is in the area I live near. So, should be an interesting project to do today. So, anyway, if you look at the small display in the corner, I will show you kind of what I want to do here. So, just bear with me while I kind of get things adjusted here. So kind of matches, and just take a sample. Okay, and felt pen. So I'm going to create an outlet maybe here-ish with kind of do it like that. And maybe a small waterfall right here would be neat. So come down like that. Trickle it down. Shoreline color almost. Shoreline, yeah. Work like that. Okay. Oh, my eyes are a little tired today, so it's a little hard here. Oh, come on. Get in. Hey. Go away. Oh, God. Let's move the picture around, I suppose. I fucked it up. Oh, good job. Got lines down here, and all through here there's going to be little stones and things. I actually got a. It isn't a heavy river really, but I guess when its reservoir is full, yeah. Oh, that'll be another cool thing to play around with this too. But essentially, yeah, river runs down here, kind of comes down here. There's falls all through it here, and then once it gets down here, there is a highway crossing right over here. Yeah, so, and once we've gotten there, there is a little pool down here, and then we have to create kind of a small channel that leads in there. But yeah, essentially that's it. And I'll flick it a bit here. There you go. I can see more of it. Okay, it comes in here. There's small falls all through it here. And then it pools down here. And then this is a variable river depending on, again, more fluid volume down there. So yeah, anyway, it should be cool. Just gonna fold that up a bit. Don't necessarily need to see that, actually. Yeah, it's a reference. Alright, so it's kind of a go by the seat of your pants type deal today. So I'm gonna drink some coffee. I hate getting up at 3 in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep. Oh, right, so I need this. System. System. Reading about how to use water system. Alright, let's just go in here quickly. How to use the water system in Unreal Engine 4.26. Anyway, hey there, I got a preview. That's another post. Let's not read that. Yeah, I think it's probably the better one. This video actually shows you how to enable it, if I'm not mistaken.
And last up is the bright and fun atmospheric adventure platformer Sword.
We wanted to be able to say water goes here, and then have the level designers go in and place it. So we were able to get something working for Chapter 2, and now what we're trying to do is clean that up and deliver it to Unreal Engine at large so that everyone else.
Wait a minute, it wasn't so much that. I need to figure out how to, if I would, I did enabled it, so. System. I'll pretty much preview doesn't have water plugin. No, it does. Live water system. Oops. Mumble, 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 mumble. Fuck, it's one of these. I hope it's not one of these. Oh, actually, here we go. You need to, yeah, okay. It's a lot advanced than that now, but let's just, okay. Yeah, I don't know, okay, so.
Demonstration line brought A couple of days ago, Epic released the 4.26 Preview 1 available for download, and they also showed off the new 4.26 water system in a live stream, and they also mentioned when they would release 4.26 with the water. But before we get into that, I just want to thank Ryan Brooks and the team over there at Epic for some of the amazing work that they've done on the water system that they're bringing here in 4.26. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get right into it. So first of all, how it works is it's a plugin that you just enable. There's the water system plugin and the landmass plugin. Once you have those two plugins enabled in your project, you'll just be able to drag in the different water actors that they have. For example, the ocean, island, river, and lake. Now it is important to mention that this is all built upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. I think they added it back in 4.24. Now how this works is you just create all built upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. I think they added it back in 4.24. Upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. I think they added it back in 4.24. In your project, you'll just be able to drag in the different water actors that they have. For example, the ocean, island, river, and lake. Now it is important to mention that this is all built upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. I think they added it back in 4.24. Now how this works is you just create a dedicated layer for water bodies, and you can just add those in and it works dynamically. Able to drag in the different water actors that they have. For example, the ocean, island, river, and lake. Now it is important to mention that this is all built upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get right into it. So first of all, how it works is it's a plugin that you just enable. There's the water system plugin and the landmass plugin. Once you have those two plugins enabled in your project, you'll just be able to drag
the landmass plugin. Christ. Sorry. All right. Good. Let's get rid of this lake. And I have a feeling it's going to be pretty damn cool. In here. Here we go. Water body custom lake. Here we go. Let's see how this works. Interesting. It's going to be about here-ish, I guess. Oh man, this is so cool. Oh, widen it and kind of move it a bit. Yeah. Is that spline? Can I? Ah, ha, ha. There we go. Alright, yeah, got it. Cool. Spines. I should have done that, I guess. Yeah, so I need to click the actor again, I guess. And, That's a weird one. Man, it's really fucking low. Raise this thing up. Raise this up. Water body like, alright. Oh, there we go. Okay. Didn't they finish compiling the fucking shaders or anything? Can't see it. Why not? No, that's disappointing. It's not even doing anything. Okay. Clearly there's something going on with that material or something. Let's see. Reload it. Okay, that's odd. Oh, what do we got here? Erosion. Okay, let's see. Wrong map. Whoa! What the hell? Okay, that's fucking weird. Why is it up here? What in the hell? Let me do that again. I don't know what happened there, but alright. Oh, yeah, right. Water. A lake. Place it right here. Sure. Top is, I have no idea. Why is this? That's interesting. Okay, how do you actually fucking work with this on a map that's already been built? I guess watch more videos about how it actually works. Oh.
In the different water actors that they have, for example, the ocean, island, river, and lake. Now, it is important to mention that this is all built upon their new non-destructible landscape layer system. I think they added it back in 4.24. Now, how this works is you just create a dedicated layer for water bodies, and you can just add those in, and it works dynamically with the landscape. So, for example, the rivers will carve out a part of the landscape, much like the landscape layer spline. In their video, they showed a lot of this, just some of the tools that you can use to kind of manipulate the landscape, and it works dynamically with the landscape. So for example, the rivers will carve out a part of the landscape, much like the landscape layer spline. In their video, they showed a lot of this, just some of the tools that you can use to kind of manipulate the landscape terrain while moving the water bodies around. Now, they did show off all the different water bodies that they have, such as the oceans, the lakes, and the rivers. Now, I'm not
I'll watch this again, I suppose.
And basic materials to a scene that's a little bit more indicative of what you can do with some actual art. Designers wouldn't have to be going in anymore and seaming up splines, connecting to lake meshes and blending them out and fiddling with terrain curves and all this stuff. We just basically wanted to be able to say water goes here and then have the level designers go in and place it. So we were able to get something working for chapter 2, and now what we're trying to do is clean that up and deliver it to Unreal Engine at large so that everyone else can use it. It's going a little bit, it took a little bit longer than initially planned because
Ah, god damn it. The desktop audio fucked up. Let's try. No.
in showing a few of the ways that
Oh,
we
there we
use
go.
the system market report.
Damn
So the
Bluetooth
first thing you
audio
see with the new water
problem.
system, we have these new water bodies in the world. This is a water body test map that's going to be with the water plugin. It's called water body, water test map. And you can see with these water bodies, we now have an actor for each body. You can kind of move it around, set it in the right height of the world, and it kind of blends things together.
1080p, dumbass.
And on these actors, there's a bunch of settings for things like how it's going to deform the world. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and just delete these things and just place new ones because it's a little bit more fun when you can see it from scratch. So this is just a blank landscape and a blank map, essentially. And in the place actors, I'm going to go ahead and search for water. And you'll see here we have a few different water types like lake, ocean, river, island. We'll go ahead and drop down an ocean. So you'll see what this does is it actually creates a spline, and now wherever we drag this thing, it's making the ocean level at the height of that actor, but it's also kind of flattening out an island around this terrain. And there's a number of things that go into how this carves the terrain. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit smaller for now. So one thing I'd like to point out is what we have is a curve to control what ends up being the elevation of the water under the terrain, or the water depth. So I'm going to go over here on the terrain, or sorry, the water body settings under terrain, curve settings. You'll notice that we have this curve here. And what this curve does is it actually represents the profile of that fall off. It's evaluated on the 0 to 1 range. So we're really just within this kind of box I've selected here. So it's kind of a nice S curve by default. And then what you can do is control how it's mapped by using these settings here. So right now, this ocean is set to be 2,000 centimeters, which is 20 meters deep. But we can go ahead and make it a little bit shallower, so it's a little bit more obvious. And we have the fall off set to be at about 80 meters. But we can make the fall off really harsh. We can make it really long.
Yeah, essentially, I think because
we can
my
kind of keep it back where we
whole
have it.
landscape is not where it should be.
So while we're looking at that curve, what we could actually do, if we wanted to, and this isn't something we end up tweaking a lot, but it's nice to know that it's there, is let me try to make this a little bit more visible for you.
It's also complicated.
When I'm placing these points in here, these are actually affecting the profile live, and it doesn't have to be, it can be nonlinear. Not a very interesting example, but you can see that I've made kind of a concentric ring in the fall off there. So it really allows you to customize the profile of your water features. And then of course, how these things work is they get added to a layer in the new landscape edit layer system. So you'll just end up with a new layer called water, and you can just turn it on and off as you want. And the neat thing about it though is you can still actually hand paint inside that layer. And that allows you to make up for some of the things that are not controllable as per point attributes. And we'll go into some more detail about that in a little bit as well. But for example, let's go ahead and make a bigger brush here.
Hey Ryan, just a quick note that I'm getting heavily compressed and poor quality, unfortunately, through Discord right now.
That's too bad. Hopefully
Yeah.
it was really good when we first started out the test.
Mm-hmm. And yesterday as well.
It improves. Do you think people can still at least see the programmer art content? I'm hoping it improves when we get to the actual art.
Let's switch over to the editor. It's not even actually loading where everything is still right now.
I know this guy
I'm not sure what's going on. Hey, okay, let's do this real quick. Ryan, why don't you restart your stream real quick?
Sure. You mean just the screen share?
Yes. So stop streaming. Yep. And then I'm gonna close that. Let's go ahead and get it back up again.
Sorry, folks. Bear with us. Any improvement?
Yes, that is a lot better actually. All right, cool. Sorry, y'all. Looks good now. Let's everyone hold your thumbs and toes and whatever else you want to hold to make sure that this stays up. Please go ahead, Ryan.
No worries. All right. So what I'm trying to show here is that you can still go ahead and create another paint layer on top of water to apply some custom changes. If you wanted to have the beach be a little bit, softer and higher, or just really sculpt it out. And what that's really doing is storing the delta between what was there and what was under. So if I unhide water now, you'll still see I have a little bit of this kind of paint that I did before, but you can always just clear that, or you can go in and paint black to erase it. I'm going to go ahead and clear that. All right. So that's basically how the water depth is defined. It's defined using this curve, and there's some additional options for how far you want to offset this thing. You can tell it to have a big flat area. But then there's also the component of how does it carve the rest of the terrain. You'll notice that we're kind of creating a little valley there. And that's basically using this setting called water height map settings. And that's a struct that defines a bunch of different settings. We're going to go ahead and stick to the fall off settings for now. And you'll notice that right now this is in angle mode. So as I move this thing down, it's essentially going to cut the rest of the terrain at an angle. And you can change that angle to be, shallow, steep, or keep it as it was. Or you can also set it to width mode, which in that case, now it's not going to be an angle, it's just going to be a constant fall off. So you can kind of control exactly how that's going to apply. And the edge offset here is kind of separate from the curve offset. So you really have separate two-way control for your edge offsetting, which is pretty powerful. And below the basic fall off settings for things like width and angle, there's these effects areas. There's a little bit of blurring because right now these shapes are actually generated on the distance field using jump flooding. So that process, when it's not done at a super high resolution, can pick up a little bit of aliasing artifacts. If I turn off blurring, it's on by default at 2, and that pretty much fixes it. But you can adjust it as needed to kind of smooth out the result. But you'll notice that that's blurring the actual distance field result, not the height result. So you'll notice that no matter how blurry I set that, it's not going to blur this top edge. That's actually something different. That's actually this smooth blending step here. So if I can go ahead and change smooth blending between inner and outer separately. So inner smooth smooths the inside, as you can see there, and then outer smooths the outer side. So you really have separate control over the plateauing. There's also some curl noise options, but I'm going to refrain from showing those right now because they're a little bit broken with water. They're more of a landmass feature. But you're free to add in noise just by perturbing your points, doing whatever. Let me go ahead and remove some of that crazy edge offsetting. And then I'm going to go ahead and recreate a little bit of that scene we had here before. So now we have an ocean. I'm going to go ahead and drop in, how about a lake? So one thing that is kind of a limitation with the system right now is it will not blend, say, a lake with an ocean. So if you try to put a lake overlapping an ocean, what you're going to get is something a little weird. But what you can do is place them at the same Z height. And then you could use the material to fade in some custom stuff there. So we do this in Fortnite a lot. Is for the swamp, what we actually do is we have a lake there at sea level, and then we replace the material on it, and it has some sort of mask that colorizes just that region. But generally, when you're placing a lake, you'll have it be as part of the terrain, and then probably connect it with a river. So let's go ahead and do that. So one thing to note about rivers is currently they are explicit. They don't have any, they won't try to automatically connect to the height of a ocean or lake. So it's good to be aware of the heights that you're going to put your lakes at. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that one at 0 and ocean at 768, just so that now when I drag in this river, you'll notice the river dragged in at 0, so it's already blended in. And we do get automatic blending of the terrain height between water and rivers. You'll notice that the river blends into the lower depth of the lake. And the same thing will happen with the ocean once we set it at the correct height. It's just that here we have the river too high. I'm going to go ahead and make this ocean bigger so I have more room to play with. Okay, so now that we have these spline points, I'm going to go ahead and point out, right now, not all of the defaults on these rivers or these new actors are what they will be in the end. We expect we will probably include things like a wider fall off default, for example, because there are certain limitations with the way that the water is rendered. And we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and set that river down to 768. Oops, I did that wrong. I moved the whole thing. What I meant to do was in selected points, when you select your water spline, you can now go down here under water. This shows all of the water properties, such as depth, velocity, and width. But you can also adjust the point directly. So I'm just going to go ahead and set these river points to be exactly at the ocean height. So now we get an automatic blend. And another thing you probably want to do is set the velocity at the endpoint to 0, and it'll automatically fade out back to whatever the river velocity was. And depending on the shape of each specific river, you might want to adjust things like the Z offsetting. In this case, I can tell we're getting a little bit of this river bleeding over here. We can offset the Z height of the terrain a little bit to fix that. And then the other thing that's causing this is I can know from experience that the tangents aren't flat. So this river is actually going downhill. What we need to do there is just simply select the arrive and leave tangents and set them to 0. And you can tell we overshot our Z offset a little bit now. Let me go ahead and reduce that. There we go. So yeah, with adjusting things like the Z offset of the terrain on the water body, you can get a pretty smooth transition. And then go ahead, going up here, and go ahead and select this point, set its velocity to 0 as well. And this is actually a good time to show the visualizers, which if you saw my Unreal Fest / was a GDC talk, you already see this, but what we can do now is show these visualizers for width and depth and start to just play with them directly in the editor. Or sorry, directly on the component without selecting things and typing separate values. We'll just come in and kind of do what feels right. Can have some really deep, crazy spots, but it's not quite what we want. Okay, and then of course also there's velocity, which it acts very similarly. I don't have foam yet hooked up inside of this shader, but what it's doing is it's changing the flow map strength. So as you increase velocity, you will see the flow map increase. But by the time we ship this, we do plan to add the foam back, and that's what Fortnite does. Is it basically has in the material, it reads this velocity from the water body, and then it uses it to apply some masking for some foam that shows up.
Oh, cool.
And we can actually see what that looks like now. And I guess I'll back up a step here and mention that how these guys are all rendered. So these are all separate actors, as we mentioned. They're all just different water bodies, but they're all being rendered by the same actor. So in the world now, you'll see we've got a pretty simple scene. We've got some our landscape and basic lights in our water bodies, but then we have this water mesh actor and also the water brush manager. We can ignore that guy. You don't really need to think about him. The water mesh actor, though, this is actually what's doing the final rendering for the water. So we can go ahead and jump into wireframe mode, and we can see that. How it refines based on distance, and we have this one unified surface that's kind of connecting everything. So even though these water bodies are separate actors, what they're doing is they're communicating their material back to the main water system, or the water actor. And we can actually looking for the there we go. Water mesh show tile bounds 1. That will show you how this water mesh actually gets broken up behind the scenes. So blue is ocean tiles, red is river, green is lake, and then yellow and purple are the transitions. And that's important when we start to talk about things like shader complexity, because
It's funny that I'm so excited.
we do extra things like the flow maps on the river, but we don't want to have to pay for the flow map out in the ocean. So what we do is we restrict the flow map to being only on the river or the transition tile. And then what we do is we mask out using velocity. So technically you always want rivers to have some velocity. You could actually cause bugs if you selected all river points and set no velocity. And I'll show you why that is. We go ahead and set velocity on these points to 0.
Yeah,
Oops, I want velocity.
when I'm stopped, everything would collide.
And what that does, we're going to now see a little bit of a seam between these two where river and lake connect. And that's because what we're really doing is using velocity behind the scenes as a kind of a way to blend between the different waves of the different water bodies. But before go into waves, which I think will be the next thing we talk about after this, I'd like to talk just briefly about the water mesh and the type of shading that it uses with the new single layer shading model. Sorry, single layer water shading model. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this guy. And what I have here is just a water plane. So, going back in time to when you had to place a static mesh for a river or a lake, and then you realize, oh God, it doesn't fit. I have to go in and make a custom mesh. So yeah, but we're going to use this just to kind of show a really basic single layer water material. So this material here is similar to the ocean one we were already looking at, but it's kind of bare bones. So this is the basic single layer water. You can see here, this is the material attributes bin. And all that's really going in here is we have this water texture surface node. What this really is this acts as both the faraway the faraway normal map replacement. So we're mostly rendering Gerstner waves for the normal map of the water, but far away they get too aliasy, so we fall back to just simple panning textures. But it also reuses that texture lookup to apply a very faint detail texture near the camera as well. And this is all pretty standard stuff. It's just most of it's defined by this water attributes, which is pretty much just setting the specular, the roughness, the refraction, and there's a little bit of kind of the fading of the refraction with depth in here as well. But the water attributes is meant to be, this is just the very basic constants of water, no textures or anything like that. And then the texture break as the breakup. And then down here is where we get to the actual meat of what's new with single layer. So obviously this material is using single material attribute pin, but normally this is the material input. Single layer water adds this additional single layer water material input. And what that does is it allows you to specify your scattering and your absorption coefficients. So that's really what causes the blue coloration and the nice scattering inside of the water. And this new shading model has actually been in the engine since 4.24. It was written originally by Sebastian Hilaire, and it was done for the same Fortnite water initiative that was mentioned previously. But the reason it kind of went in 4.24 is we don't have a way for shading models to be easily put in a plugin, so it kind of just had to be. But we haven't really talked about it too much yet. But I feel like it might be worth spending a few minutes to talk about what exactly are these scattering and absorption coefficients before messing with them. So scattering, I feel, is more obvious. It's basically how much stuff like particulates and fog is in the water that's going to cause scattering or a brighter glow in the water. And absorption is more how quickly does light get absorbed by the water? How quickly does it lose its energy? And if we want to figure out the correct way to apply this, we can actually jump over to Wikipedia to get kind of an idea of what this means. So absorption coefficients basically define for the visible light spectrum how much each frequency is going to be absorbed by water. And you don't really need to get too deep into the math here, but I'm just using this to point out that what you can do is look at a chart like this, which has the absorption spectrum, and you can actually just kind of pick some RGB colors and grab the values from this chart and then plug them in manually. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick attempt at that really quick. But first thing to point out is that absorption coefficients are actually specified using this weird thing called reciprocal meters. That's this m-1 thing. And it just means it's kind of 1 over x. And it's just done that way because the units are in really small values. But you can also convert between an absorption coefficient and an absorption length. And they're the same thing, they're just opposite of each other. But personally, I find it a little bit more clear to think in terms of the absorption length. So you can actually plug in either absorption length or absorption coefficient into the shading model here. You just have to be aware of that 1 minus x. So what I've done here is actually plugged in the values for RGB from that chart manually. In the way that I've done that, let's take, for example, red. I put 0.6. How did I come up with that? On here, we can look, 700 nanometers is roughly the color red. And so what we're doing here is we're not a full spectrum renderer. We're rendering in RGB color, which means we have one channel per red, green, and blue. So really what we do is we pick a absorption coefficient for each of those. So we just need to find the closest value that we can for each of those. So 700 nanometers is a fairly good representation of red. And this is a log chart, so we can see that we start at 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. So at 700 nanometers, we have a value of 0.6 on there. And the way that what that really means is that let me see, how they define this is that, I meant to just click on the, what it really means is that after that length, you will have 1 over E left of the water. And that's important to point out is that because this is exponential fall off, the intensity of light will never go to 0. It'll just go to almost 0. But what we can do is use this to plug in our values in a little bit more intuitive way. So let's just continue that with green is about like 555. So I basically just ballparked around here. It's about 0.05. And then for blue, somewhere around 450 to 420, depending. And you could do a lot of research, and there's papers on picking the correct weighted spectrum tables, but it's probably not worth it when you're going to be tweaking the value a little bit anyways. But it comes down to about 0.005 roughly. That, so you'll see where you have a less steep value, that's where you're really going to notice the difference between your red absorption. And of course, you don't have to stick to that value from there. I would just suggest to use that as a starting point. But that's really where the physical basis of the light absorption comes from, and that's what the coefficients versus the attenuation length means. I go ahead and just do it as attenuation length because I find it to be a little bit more easy to understand. Okay, now hopefully I haven't bored everybody too much by going off on the tangent about the water scattering.
That was great stuff.
Going to go ahead and delete this simple mesh that we had and go back to the basic one, or sorry, to the water mesh actor. And now we're going to think about waves for a little bit. Okay, so I guess the best place to look at waves, I guess, is the ocean, right? So we'll select the ocean, and we're going to go ahead down here to wave. Make this a little bit more readable. Okay, so now you'll notice on a water body, we have this wave setting and we have wave source. And right now this is set to Gerstner wave asset reference. And that actually points to the content browser. This is something new that one of the rendering engineers, Kevin Nortegren, has been working on, is that basically waves are now just an asset that you can place in the content browser. And it's extremely flexible in the sense that the generator itself can be changed to different classes of generators. Currently, we just have the simple spectrum generator, which is based on the one for Fortnite, where you have essentially you set how many waves do you want, what is the min wavelength, max wavelength, the smallest wave and the biggest wave, how random the directions are, and how steep they are. So you specify just these values, and what it does is it generates and randomizes and gives you all the waves. And this being an asset is useful because now we don't have to worry about what if 2 different maps are supposed to be in the same locale and you have to keep on manually copying the waves back, or 2 water bodies are supposed to be shared, like the lake example. You want to make sure that you reference the same wave asset on them so that you're never going to have a wave mismatch between the different materials. But it also can be used even just as a generator in place. So this is really powerful, that you can just set randomly, I want to take these waves and put them right on this asset, and now I have a generator that just lives on this water body. And we can go ahead and start messing with the wavelengths. We'll go ahead and first say the num waves. We can increase this one at a time, currently all the way up to 32, although it's worth pointing out that when this actually ships, we're not planning on having a max, so that should be cool. It'll be something you'll have to just figure out kind of per platform, right? What your affordable max is. In theory, you could have thousands of waves. I'm going to go ahead and make this look a little bit better. These waves are a little bit too big. So changing the min wavelength is saying how small do I want, or how short rather do I want the smallest wave to be. And then the fall off is the distribution. So with 1, we have a linear distribution. With 2, we're saying more and more of the small wave. And if we go too high, eventually it just turns to all noise, and we don't want that. So usually a value around 4 or 3 could be decent. And also something to point out, notice we're getting these waves changing drastically a lot. On each water body is this wave attenuation water depth. And that's used to specify how quickly do the waves fade away as they reach the shore. So in this case, since we made our ocean not very deep, that's why we're not seeing much. I'm gonna go ahead back to this curve settings. Yeah, this is only 2.5 meters deep. what is that, like 10 feet or something? So it's a really shallow, like Bora Bora type thing. If we wanted to make this a little bit better, more realistic, we'll increase the depth, and then we'll also increase the width. Sorry, brain fart. So you can tell that the fall off width that you do under the terrain, while it affects the terrain underneath, it's also having just as big of an effect on your waves. So notice before I made the waves a little bit too intense because I had that fall off too high. This is an example of a bad default that we'll try to fix. And if I set this to 1, we're going to have absolutely no masking, and we get these gigantic waves all the way up to shore. Not very good. So obviously we don't want to do that. The important thing to note about the wave attenuation factor is that it's actually affecting gameplay as well. So that's why it kind of had to be unified as part of the system, because when you have a character out here, we need to know, say there could be a wave here that's gigantic, a tidal wave, but it's being masked out. So the gameplay needs to know to mask out this wave in this location due to the water depth. So it is handy to be able to tweak that per water body as well. Let's go ahead, just for the heck of it, we can put really big wave. So that's the cool thing about having 32 waves now, is you can put this one really big wave, and it kind of breaks up our tiling without having to worry. I'm going to go ahead and look back at the material real quick again, because you'll notice that before I mentioned that detail texture, and it's starting to be a problem. So let's take a look. Alrighty. So I mentioned before, or I went over that very simple single layer water for the just the texture-based material. But now this is the single layer water material that we use for all water surfaces. So lake, ocean, rivers, and transitions, they all use this. So we've tried to get this material down to be fairly cleaned up. Make it a little bit closer. And we'll kind of go through this from left to right one at a time to show what's going on here. And I'll stop when I get to the problem part. So first and foremost, here's the new function for computing the Gerstner waves. This basically, it's a material function, but it actually bases on a new code library. And it's able to get all of the waves with a loop. So there's no more giant node mess of a bunch of functions to get all these different waves. There's no more material parameter collection. And Kevin also was able to make the water data all exist in this new water buffer data. It's an unstructured buffer that lives behind the scenes. So you can just access it at any shader by just telling it what's the water body index. So you'll notice that when we place this in a material, we don't really need to say water body index on it. And the reason why is because inside of the default function, the default input is set to this water body index from tile instance. And this calls this code function that Kevin wrote that basically just gives you what the index of that water body is, and it allows it to figure out the right parameters. But it also means if you're in some other random material, all you have to do to get the waves on this material to match, you go to wave on your water body, and you'll see, hang on, watch me forget where this is. There it is. You go to water on your water body, and it's under water body index. So in this case, ocean is 0. Lake is 1. River is 2. But I want to point out, rivers do not actually have waves. We just set them to have 0 waves. And the reason for that is because it would be expensive for rivers to have waves, because we'd have to blend between 2 full wave sets on the transition tiles.
Okay.
So what we do is we kind of treat them as an airlock. And also rivers kind of have standing waves in real life anyways. They don't tend to have choppy waves like the ocean, so it didn't make sense to want to put Gerstner waves on them. There's some sort of seam happening up there. I'm not sure what that is. Probably related to something with the depth or something, but maybe figure that out later. All right, so where were we? So with the material, go back there. Excuse me. Okay, so we have this Gerstner wave function. Great. It gives you the waves, and there's this this concept in here of material attributes called wave attributes. It's not really a proper structure or anything. It really is just setting material attribute parameters. It sets material attributes for normal, and it sets them for world position offset. And the reason that that's pretty handy is when we did this for Fortnite initially, what we were doing is passing normal and world position separately everywhere, and it was just always a pain having these two pins like blending. So what we do now is we pass wave attributes and a bunch of different functions that need to do blending of waves just know to take these normal and WPO pins and manipulate them. So for example, velocity wave mask. This is how it knows how to mask out the waves using the river velocity. So this is how transitions are able to work. So there's a couple different boxes to opt in to the transition behavior. And then on the lake, or on the river, when you go down to rendering, water, you'll get these two slots, river to lake transition, river to ocean transition. And if we pop one of those open, they don't have anything set except for they say enable lake transition. And that brings over those extra instructions for the blending of both behaviors that I was talking about. Okay, making some progress. So this is basically how waves are handled for all the different permutations. Here is how the water texture surface is blended to. And I mentioned before I wasn't happy with the results, and that's because it's kind of content dependent. For a real, analytical solution, you need something like lean mapping, which analytically evaluated the waves to figure out the right distance to fade. But really what we usually do here is just kind of specify what's the start distance and what's the fade distance for how long we fade to the normal map plane. So obviously, the further you go with your actual waves, the better it's going to look, but you're fighting aliasing and noise. So I can go ahead and increase my screen percentage, and for getting realistic water rendering, that makes a big difference. And now we're able to render out, waves out to a pretty far distance. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're tweaking is depending on the type of waves you have. If I had really small noisy waves, I would probably fade to the normal map a lot quicker. Versus big waves like this, we push it out a lot further. And of course, water waves are per water body, so we can now come on here and give this lake its own waves. We'll make them a little smaller. There we go. So, oh, I know what's causing the scene. Duh. So you're intended to have the velocity faded out by the time you get to the end of the river. So I think if we just select this point here, we set velocity to 0, there we go. So that's what I was mentioning before. We kind of use the velocity to know where the river is, because we don't have any sort of spatial mapping inside the river. All these tiles are actually the same everywhere. And in fact, we'll show a little bit more about the material as we step through now. So what happens next is what we do is we set wave attributes.
I think I've seen enough about this right now, at least to think I have an idea how I can fix this gigantic fucking mess. Get rid of that, we need that. Get rid of that. Basically. This bloody map has to be lined up with this. It's above it. No problem. View. Oh, come on. What can't be moved? The editor probably. Still? What? Oh. Yeah, it was a lot of crap. Back in you go. Still? Oh, whoa. Something just happened. Alright. No, it doesn't do anything. Fuck. Ah, this. Yep. Oh, fuck. So. Okay, so. That's the point I'm looking for. So -25,600. No worries. No big deal. Okay. I think they're saying about the ocean thing. Yeah, I'm gonna try on some music, I think. Let's run this playlist. I really need to get my playlist in order for this. Let's see how this new motion tool works. Oh, my bad. So now this thing's not high and it's too damn high. God damn, look at this. This piece, please. Landscape. Fucking landscape. Go. Down just a smidge. Ah, fuck off. Come on. Ugh. Okay. Not great, not terrible. It's a really nice looking water system. Honestly, underwater is not really a big deal here either. But yeah, it looks way better than the other one. I really need to get a desktop mixer board or something. I think we could recommend one, that'd be great. If I'm actually gonna do this. Oh. Hey, buddy in the chat. How's it going? If you're still there. Sorry I haven't been watching that screen. Just about to try out some of the lake. So. Okay, well. So I'm trying to That's interesting. I didn't notice that. Okay, so oh, right, the definable landmass characteristic of this would mean essentially it has to be like that. So the river, in order to work, has to. Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm gonna wrap it around in a way like create a spline point here. Not drag it out there really, but kind of like that. Another spline here. Back in a bit. It's a tricky one, huh? Get the water filling into there. Yeah. Actually, yeah, we're missing part of it. Okay. Really, I just need the bottom part of this to work. Oh. Can't really like, yeah, like that. Oh, fuck. Yeah, you know, I think that'll work. I'll do that. It's gonna be the river basin. Ugh. Oh, I need to eat something. God. Alright, so let's try the, I think it's the lake acting again. That's a set correctly. Body lake. No, still not. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, what I've got here? I saw something. The fuck is that? No. Yeah, I don't think that'll do anything. Just the height. No. Plans. Let's go 4. Okay, I think I'm gonna take a break and have some lunch. I am very hungry. Ugh. Do a little more research on this and come back in an hour or so, I think. It doesn't hurt. Ooh, that looks pretty nice. I like that reflection. Yeah, I'll change the color a bit though. It's too blue to be Pacific. Well, too light blue at least. Alright. Talk to you on the other side.